Con mucho respeto, I'm going to talk about Mexicans. I live here in Florida, and I don't know what the percentage is. I know in South Florida, the Mexicanos have pretty much left, abandoned fields and construction sites. I'm sure there's some people with green cards and that are citizens that are working those trades, and I'm sure there's exceptions to this rule, but pretty much the Mexicans have left. Now I'm on their side. Viva la raza. I don't believe in all this crap that's been going down by our governor and the Republican legislature. And I've been interacting with Mexicanos since I was a very young person, growing up and living in California. In Florida, where I stayed for 25 or 30 years in the Panhandle, there's some Mexicans, basically workers, but a really good friend of mine was a musician. His name was Mark Ramos. He had a whole bunch of family last names for his middle name, and it was a litany. And I don't know it. I can't repeat it. I think there was a Jesus in there. But anyway, Mark, his family, his father, I think, was born in Mexico City, along with his mother. They had relatives in Laredo, and that's where he kind of grew up, on this side of the border, not Nuevo Laredo, in Laredo. And his uncle is fairly wealthy. They own a big Mexican food chain, like grocery stores, and most of them on the Mexican side of the border, and there are a few in the border towns because there's lots of Mexicans there and they like their food. Some of the best food in the world, by the way, of course. And please don't go to Taco Bell and think that you're eating Mexican food, because you're not. And as a matter of fact, most of the Mexican restaurants, you're not really eating traditional Mexican food, with maybe the exception of rice and beans and some pico de gallo, something like that, And even that's regional. Mexico's a big country. So the stupidity of our Florida government, the absolute inane stupidity of making it illegal to be an undocumented Mexican, and has caused all the basically Mexicans, and not all Hispanics have freaked out over this, because you got to remember that the Puerto Ricans and the Cubans and the Venezuelans and the Peruvians and the Colombians and the Chileans, that are living down in South Florida, they all think they're better than Mexicans. That's their whole deal. Mexicans are the people that they get to look down on to make themselves feel better as human beings. Kind of like nasty white people look down on everybody to make themselves feel better about themselves. So there was no allegiance there, just because they all look at it's like saying, Koreans are the same as Japanese. No. Chinese and Koreans, no. As a matter of fact, I don't think they even like each other that much. I know that none of the Latin countries care that much about Mexico. I'm not saying everybody's like that, but there is a general in those countries. Look how many Puerto Ricans voted for Trump. 56% or something. Some ungodly number. And more than that, and the the Cubans, the Batista-loving Cubans from South Florida. What the hell do you expect from them? Just look up Batista and his rule, and then you might get a really good idea of why Fidel Castro overthrew that asshole dictator. Cuba was the vice capital of the world, abortions, prostitution, gambling. That's where everybody went. That was the Las Vegas of the Northern Hemisphere, or the North American Hemisphere. It always cracked me up, too, because my aunt went to Cuba almost every year, but she was Canadian. She could get a passport and go visit as a tourist and enjoy their food and their lovely beaches and stuff and their absolute affordable accommodations and things like that, which Americans have been deprived of in my whole lifetime. I don't get that. Let me get back to Mexicans. So, Mexicans, because there's a pigmentation thing going on in Mexico as well. If you've got more European blood, than indigenous blood, people have a sense of being superior for some reason. Even my buddy Mark, who was always telling me that, he was mainly Castilian. Okay. I never gave a shit. Actually, his father was very pale-skinned, although you could tell Humberto was a Mexicano. You could also tell Mark was, too. He was fairly fair-skinned, and so was he. Married a white girl. His kids look white. Now, his mother, I'm sorry, she might have been a little bit on the lighter side of life as a Mexican, but she was definitely a Mexican. She was a Mexican woman. And she was the kind of woman who probably voted for Trump. I hate to say that. So, anyway, Mark was a very liberal, very well-educated, well-spoken, great musician. He actually spent a few weeks working up in Muscle Shoals, in the Muscle Shoals horn section. That there was another cat from Pensacola, Tommy Whitmire, did that for a little bit. Him and the other guy from Pensacola who was a keyboard player, and I can't think of his name. Mark was a trumpet player. Actually went to his induction with Dwayne Allman, who actually got out on a legitimate something or other. Mark didn't. Mark went to Vietnam and was there 6 weeks, and his idiot lieutenant had made him go out on daytime patrols, which they didn't go. You don't go on daytime patrols in Charlie's territory and rice paddies. You just didn't do that. If you did, chances are good you get picked off. So this lieutenant calls for a group, and a mortar dropped right in between them. But Mark was in charge of a backpack, with a phone on it, those crank things, and they sent him to go get it. So now this is a secondhand story. This is a story Mark told me, and he never really. I had to kind of force this out of him. He doesn't like talking about stuff like this. None of my Vietnam buddies ever liked talking about any of it. But every now and then, drunk enough, they might. So Mark got blown up. Now, after that, he doesn't mind telling the story because he went to Australia, and he talks about how nice those Australian girls were to him. He was in a coma for like 5 or 6 weeks. Got whatever medal they gave you for being wounded. And they shipped him back to the States, where he went out on Gulf Beach Highway and got into a drunk, hit him head on, threw him in the hospital again, almost died, went into a coma. Anyway, and that was after I had first met him, because right after he came back from Australia, he went to Los Angeles, and I had gone down to Los Angeles to, from San Francisco Bay Area to see what I could do musically, and I had met some guys from Pensacola, Ricky Pierce, and that was a horrible thing. Andy Parker, I guess, was the drummer. He was kind of a shit for brain. He was from Two Egg, Florida. I know I'm going to stay on Mexicans here. I'm just trying to paint a little bit of picture about me and Mark. I wrote a song about Mark called Long Way to Laredo, and I kind of tied it in with my younger brother Rob's passing, because they passed within about a year of each other, and I was writing a song about one of them. I can't tell you which one passed first. It's an odd thing. So the other one decided to die, and so I had the song going, so I kind of combined both of their souls into one song. Yeah. So enough of that. But Mark had been a really good friend of mine up until the day he died. Matter of fact, the day that he died, I remember it was a Thursday. I don't know now how long ago it was. Probably 10 years ago, maybe. Maybe not quite. I know my brother's been dead about that long, so it was about like that, some between 8, 9, 10 years ago. He called me up from his hospital bed, and I go, "Hey man," and we're just shooting the shit. And he goes, "Hey Johnny, tonight's the night, man. You're just gonna have another old buddy that's not here anymore." I go, "Well, nah, Mark, shit, man, don't say that, I still have never gotten over it, but my other buddy Barney had just died. So, and there was a killing field that happened in those few years there. Lots of people I knew died. My mother died. My aunt died. I had aunts and uncles-in-laws that died. But I just talked about that because Mark was a good friend. We talked a lot. We talked about life, and we talked about, he was always having a little contest with me about Mexican culture, because I had spent probably considering all the times I went to Mexico in my youth, I probably spent 6 months to a year there, all told. I had gone there. I think the first time I went there, I was there like a month and a half, 2 months. The second time I went, same amount of time, and so on and so forth. And I went about 4 times. So whatever. That would be about 8 months maybe. And I made some good friends. And I made some good friends in California working construction. I hired Mexicans all the time. And I wasn't a big company. Of course, I was looking for, you know, cheap labor, but more than cheap labor, I was always looking for somebody who would stick with it, get the job done, and who was honest. Mexicans. Mexicans. Can't say it enough. Mexicans. Mexicans. You know, I don't know where they got a bad reputation. I never saw anything about Mexicans. I take that back. I've seen some mean ass Mexicans, but I'm sure nowhere near as mean as white people that I've seen in my life. So I'll tell you the story about Mark and me going to Mexico. Now I'm going to tell you a story about one of the times I was in Mexico. And this completely changed my life. Was kind of I was a sort of a hippie in those days, and I was a musician. And I had taken, some psychedelic drugs, and my soul had been psychedelicized by that time. So I was willing to go here and there and not worry too much about it. I wasn't afraid of other people. So we're driving out of a little town called San Blas. Well, actually, we were coming out of Mazatlan, and we had spent the day in a little town called Tepic. And the roads weren't good. This was back in the 60s, 70s, I think. Early 70s. So we were heading down to a town called Puerto Vallarta. And back in those days, there was no coast highway going down along like there is today, I think. I haven't been down there, so I don't know. But I think they actually have a coast highway now that goes all along the coast, which is a shame. So we're on our way to, and we were all piled in a Volkswagen bus, and I don't know why we didn't get gas in Tepic, but we didn't, because we looked at a map and we saw that there were several little pueblos on the way to not Mazatlan. I'll think of it. I already said it once. Not Port Escondido either. Maybe it was Port Escondido. So, which is a place that I spent on this trip. Before I get to the end of it, I spent 18 days in the jail there for one little splam. But on the way down to Puerto Vallarta, that's what I'm talking about, not Port Escondido, that's a whole nother story. We're going down to Puerto Vallarta, and of course every pueblo we went by had now a gas station. This was back in the days where people were still, wearing homemade peasant clothes and sarapis, and actually saw a couple of people riding burros. It was like that. The dirt roads. So we were gonna try to make it, but so we're cruising along. Nah, we still have like 40, 50 miles to go, and we're in the middle of nowhere. On one side of the road is this valley that goes down. It was a beautiful valley. Sun was going down. And then the side of the road that we were traveling on was the mountains went up, but it went into these banana plantations. So we pull over to the side, and here comes this young Mexicanos, and he had more Indian blood in him than Spanish blood. He was, but we got along. We spoke enough Spanish. Actually, one of us that was with us was a Spanish teacher, and so he was fairly fluent. I could understand and get around in it a little bit, but I was not. So the bottom line was, and he had a big old thing of platanos or bananas, but they were like plantain type. So he said, vamonos, and so we followed him into this jungly kind of place. We actually followed down the side of a little creek. We didn't go very far. Maybe 500 yards, enough to where you couldn't see the camp from the road, but it wasn't that long of a walk. So we come along this camp, and next to this beautiful little creek. Well, it was kind of a river. I'd say it was maybe 10, 15 feet wide, and there was clothes all hung up on the branches around the side of the river, and there was a couple of kids there, and there was his wife was there, and she was cooking, and she saw when they saw us coming. The kids and the wife kind of went and hid, and he was saying, no, it's okay, come on out. So, what we were trying to do was get some gasoline for the truck. And he says, I can get gasoline for you, but not till tomorrow. So, that's that. Well, I had a little bit of weed. We actually had a bottle of tequila, and we had cigarettes. We did have some gringo food, like we had I think we had some like a bag of M&Ms or something that somebody had scored in Tepic or someplace like that. They might have been Mexican candies. I can't remember. So we divvied that up, gave those to the kids. Everybody wanted cigarettes. They were poor, they didn't have anything. When later on in the evening, I went back and said, let's just get I forget, quiero tequila, and they, oh, yeah. So we went and I got the bottle of tequila. We all sat around, drank tequila, and smoked cigarettes. Now, I thought it was strange because these kids couldn't have been more than 9 or 10 years old. And their parents were letting them take a little hit off the tequila. And they were letting them have a little smoke. But, and as the guy explained himself, and I can't remember his name because it was sort of an Indian name, which I can't remember. And he explained, this is such a treat for us. We never get any of this. I work. We don't ever have any money. We're too far from a store. I go and get bananas. I load them up. The truck follows me around. And so he basically works in the plantation during the day. And he didn't want to be away from his wife and kids, so during the season, they just camp out. I had a nice little shelter if it rained. Had a great little fire. It was a comfortable campsite. And they did not have much. They gave us everything they had. Food, whatever. She went out of her way to make us comfortable places to sleep. Two of us went back and slept in the van because that normally didn't happen. Most of the time there was 5 of us in the van, so it stunk and there was not much room. But if you slept, we were close enough to the water where we didn't have a lot of bugs, and it was just a wonderful, beautiful night that I spent in my life, and I just never forgot it because of how simple these people were, how beautiful they were. I mean, they weren't very tall, but they were so handsome. I mean, they were just very beautiful. I don't know. I can't explain their beauty physically and mentally and inwardly. They just, I don't know if they were Christians. I don't know if they believed in some indigenous force or what. All I know is that they were amazing. So, after we left there, we went down to Puerto Vallarta, and we went up north of Puerto Vallarta to a little place called Mismaloya, where The Night of the Iguana was filmed, and the famous director, family guy, and whatever his name is, I can't think of his name, had a house there. But I'll never forget that night I spent with that poor little family. And I shouldn't say poor little family because they were so happy. They were so kind. They were so loving to one another. And it always made me think, how anybody could, number one, have anything against that culture of people, the Mexican people in general. And how anybody could think that they are an inferior people. There's no way that they are inferior people. Yeah. They don't run around like drunken maniacs putting other people down, and, they're just very gracious and kind. So, anyway, I don't blame the Mexicans for leaving Florida. I'm on this June 1st where, Mexicanos are not going to participate in America just for one day. Well, I'm going to support them. June 1st, not doing anything. I think that's Tuesday. So, or maybe Tuesday's I have to go to the dentist on the 31st. So, the next day I'm not doing anything anyway, probably. But definitely not going shopping or participating in anything like that. I'm going to stand with them. Anyway, that's about all I got to say about Mexicans. They have as much right to be in this country as anybody does. For Christ's sake, it was their country for almost 300 years, and it was only 150 years ago that we took a giant chunk of it, more than almost a half of it. California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, southern Colorado, southern Utah, and then Nevada. The way I'm looking at it nowadays, be better off if it was Mexico. The crap that this country has turned into, this fascist dictatorship. I know this is all going to turn around and bite all these Republican fascists in the butt one day. But right now, it's pretty grim. And thank God, I'm not going to say who the guy who cuts my grass and mows my lawn and does all that stuff is a naturalized American citizen who's a citizen along with his brother, and they do yard work. But knowing DeSantis and the lousy cops in this state, they'd pull him over anyway and ignore his paperwork just because he looks different or he looks like a Mexican. So I always tell him, I told him last week when he came, I go, man, be safe, and I won't care if you leave and I have to figure out how to mow my own lawn. Up until I couldn't mow it, I did. I never had a gardener ever in my life until I had all these heart attacks and stuff. So anyway, my usual sign off is, adios, buenos noches, mi amigos y mi amigas.